Good afternoon and welcome everyone. My name is Bijan Ahmadi and I'm the Executive Director and Chief Operating Officer at the Canada-China Business Council, CCBC. It's a pleasure to welcome you all to today's webinar hosted by CCBC titled Canada-China Business Relations Outlook Under a New Government. Thank you for taking the time to join us today. We're especially grateful to our panelists and moderator for lending their expertise to this timely and important conversation. I would also like to acknowledge and thank our sponsor, DLA Piper, for supporting this webinar. As many of you know, Canada's relationship with China continues to evolve amid a backdrop of shifting geopolitical realities, economic headwinds, and growing complexity in global trade. With the new government now in place in Ottawa, this is a particularly opportune moment to reassess the direction of bilateral relations with China. Today's discussion will explore what that recalibration could look like, and more importantly, what it might mean for Canadian businesses. We'll consider the opportunities and constraints ahead, not only in the context of Canada-China relations, but also in light of Canada's trade challenges with the United States and broader global uncertainties. Our goal with today's session is to engage in a constructive and forward-looking dialogue. At CCBC, we believe it is essential for our members and for the wider Canadian business community to have access to informed perspectives that can guide their decision-making. To that end, we are proud to welcome a panel of highly respected voices from the worlds of business, policy, and academia. Allow me to introduce them very briefly. Their full bios are available on the CCBC website. So I'll just go through very short and brief introductions of their only main affiliations. The Honorable Martin Cauchon, former Minister of Justice and Attorney General of Canada, Vice Chair of CCBC's Board of Directors, and Counsel at DS Lawyers Canada. Gwen Burrows, Assistant Vice President, International Engagement and Impact at the University of Toronto, and also a member of CCBC Board of Directors. Paul Evans, Professor Emeritus at UBC's School of Public Policy and Global Affairs. Professor Evans is also a Canadian representative on the ASEAN Regional Forum's Experts and Eminent Persons Group, and Konstantin Karyanopoulos, former president and CEO of Neo Performance Materials, and also a member of the CCBC Board of Directors. We're also very pleased to have Stephen Wortley, partner at DLA Piper, and also a member of our Board of Directors at CCBC, moderating today's discussion. Before we begin, a quick note for our attendees. You can submit your questions in writing during this session through the Q&A box that is available at the bottom of your Zoom page. We'll do our best to address as many of your questions as possible during this panel discussion. With that, I'll hand it over to Stephen. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Bijan, and thanks to CCBC as well for organizing today's very timely session. As Bijan noted, we have an excellent array of panelists from various disciplines, and we expect a very robust and lively discussion. I too would like to thank everyone for joining us today. As we know, the topics that we are going to discuss today are being informed by events that are moving very, very quickly. Just recently, we have seen a pause in most of the China-US tariffs, certainly a positive direction. Over the weekend, we heard from China's ambassador to Canada about the need and desire to reset the relationship. And most recently, we have seen a cabinet shuffle in Canada. So now is the opportune time with a fresh start to look at new opportunities. There'll be many topics to delve into today, including, as Bijan noted, how can Canada navigate a potentially renewed relationship with China without exacerbating the pain points involving the current US administration? In other words, can Canada thread the needle in furtherance of its goal to diversify its trading relationships and people-to-people engagement, including in the areas of research partnership and university collaboration? Singapore, New Zealand, and Australia have done this on the trading and investment front, but can Canada do the same thing? Or is the economic relationship with the US so constraining and so important that threading the needle will be too challenging, except perhaps in safe harbors like clean energy and agriculture, and perhaps even more LNG exports from Canada to China. With Constantine in particular, we're going to explore the critical minerals space and other areas where Canada could and should welcome Chinese investment in the development of our important mineral and mining space. And we're going to discuss some of the solutions moving forward, including the operation of enhancing North American supply chains, yes, with Chinese technology and business. If other G7 leaders, and I know this question gets asked and posed quite frequently, are engaging with China at the most senior levels, what about Canada? And what about the ties between Canadian ministries and their Chinese counterparts? What is the status of those channels? And are they broken? And if they're broken, how can we fix them? Because we know in the past, and I know Professor Evans knows this, we had very robust engagement in all levels of government. Looking forward, will there be an opportunity at APEC, which is being held in South Korea this year around the same time as CCBC AGM in Beijing, to mend those relationships? Is that the new starting point? We can't have a discussion, I think, about China without mentioning the Indo-Pacific strategy. In that document, now running nearly 3 years old, China was referred to as a disruptive power in a rules-based global trading system that Canada clearly wants to play in. But now we are seeing, obviously, more disruptions and probably more to come in the rules-based global trading system. Our focus today is what is the path forward for Canada with its engagement with China in the context of those disruptive influences. So let's get started with our panelists, and I'll start with Constantine Karinanopoulos, former CEO of Neo Performance Materials, on the trading and investment portion of our session today from a business perspective. Constantine, for those who know him, had built a very successful company as the former CEO and president of Neo Performance Materials, with operations including in China and worldwide, and of course a plant in Peterborough, Ontario. In preparing for today's session, Constantine, you shared with me your view that Canadian companies need to have better access to the Chinese consumer and industrial markets, in addition to those in the EU and Asia, if Canada is to have any chance of diversifying its trading relationship over the next decade. And I wanted to add, and this goes back to the former president of Tech Corporation mentioning that Canada needed to decouple. And he mentioned these comments about 10 years ago. It was to decouple from our conventional trading partners and diversify its relationships, including with China's CIC. So, Constantine, moving back to you on the tariff front, and this is a sort of tit for tat situation, but under the Biden administration, there was 100% tariffs on Chinese EVs, and Canada quite quickly replicated that tariff. Can you share with us your views on the approach Canada has been taking in imposing tariffs on Chinese-made EVs, and how we should shape the trading and investment relationship going forward?
Thank you, Stephen. Sure, go ahead and start me with a zinger. Sure. Good afternoon, everybody. Stephen, this is it's a point of pain for some of us who lived through the time, and I think this is what I would put in this action on applying 100% tariffs on Chinese EVs into Canada was what I would consider an own goal. And if we're going to get our trading future right, especially as our new prime minister has made it very clear that the old way of doing things is dead, we need to rethink a lot of our actions of the past. So going back to a little less than a year ago, as you said, the Biden administration imposed 100% tariffs on Chinese EVs coming into the United States. Within, I believe, a month, and again, at this age, I don't remember particularly well, but I think it was within a month or so, Canada announced 100% tariffs on Chinese EVs. Why? Who were we trying to protect? There were no Chinese EVs brought into Canada. We're not making any EVs in Canada yet. And we could have taken a path that didn't have to be that one. We had two paradigms that we could have followed. One was the American paradigm, where, again, Biden imposed 100% tariffs. Or we could have taken the European approach if we felt that tariffs was the right way forward. Assuming, we'll give the government the benefit of the doubt. So assuming that tariffs was the way forward, we could have gone what the Europeans did. After 2 years of exhaustive evaluation of the Chinese supply chains, the Chinese system of direct, indirect subsidies, not like we don't offer subsidies to our automotive industry, but that's a separate discussion for a separate day. We decided, and the Europeans imposed tariffs ranging from 7 to 35% on top of the existing 10% tariffs on Chinese EVs. And those tariffs varied by producer and the degree to which the EU analysts determined that those manufacturers were recipients of unfair subsidies. Again, the subject of what's fair and what's unfair merits a whole different discussion, given the history of subsidies to the automotive industry, both in North America and Europe. But again, let's pretend and assume that that isn't the context. So Canada could apply 100% tariffs like the Americans, no tariffs, or follow the European example, which was a very rational, very well studied, where the American example came across as rather arbitrary, which perhaps signaled what was to come in a subsequent administration. And we decided to go ahead with the American example, perhaps trying to curry favor with our American friends, being part of the North American trading environment, and so on. And in the process, I think we didn't help our case with all of our other trading partners. We seemed to almost blindly follow the American example, and we will do whatever the Americans are doing, which is fine if that's the direction you want to pursue. But it didn't make an awful lot of sense on this example and this approach. And of course, now we are paying the price because the canola farmers, the pork farmers, the hog farmers, and the beef farmers have a problem with accessing the Chinese market. So in effect, we have really hurt certain trading classes of Chinese producers in order to do exactly what? Protect what jobs exactly, which to me it's still unclear. But we could have followed the path of reason and rational analysis, and we chose not to. And that action has been very heavily criticized by the Chinese government, fair or unfair or indifferent. You should all make up your minds. But I personally would have preferred a much more measured, calculated, and rational approach than just doing what our friends to the south did.
Thanks, Steve. That's a great answer. And I want to turn to probably not another easy topic, but the sensitive topic relating to Chinese FDI into Canada, and again to set the context for this. Under the Harper government, Canada confronted the potential investment in the oil sands space. And I applaud the government at that time because it decided to let that investment to proceed on a grandfathered basis. but to view things through the lens of net benefits to Canada. And that point you make about, is the investment going to bring jobs? Is it going to enhance our supply chain? Looking holistically at the question. And now fast forward, to the last few years under the previous Trudeau government, we've seen the government of Canada make decisions around forcing Chinese shareholders in relatively early stage lithium projects in a faraway place in Argentina to divest, their interests, and a lot of fanfare went with that announcement. I know this is a sensitive topic for those on today's call in the mining space. You hear talk about this issue all the time at PDAC and the need for Canada to attract investment into its mining space. If it's not coming from China, where is it coming from? And sort of to further set the stage before I turn it over to you, Constantine, we've seen a Chinese miner, Zijin, a world player, no doubt acting commercially in the global markets, a fierce competitor in the space, take issue with Canada's jurisdictional view on the investment into offshore properties. It brought the matter to federal court. Obviously, we don't know the decision of the court because it was decided and settled, but in the end, the investment by Zijin into a group of South American silver and copper properties proceeded with the promise to have part of that offtake end up back into the North American supply chain. So back to my earlier point, is there a way to allow investment that enhances supply chain without just having a blanket no for that sort of investment? So the question is, given the capital needs of our junior miners, do we need a reset on our critical minerals policy to include consideration of net benefits of Chinese investment into the space?
Right. Well, that was also a rhetorical question, right, Stephen? Listen, I had a front row seat on another Zijin deal. I was chairman of Neolithium, that after 6 years when we started it with a project in Argentina, 150 employees in Argentina, 2 employees in Canada. 2/3 of our shareholders, Canadian institutions, 1/3 global institutions. We embarked on a global process, on a global search to find partners to develop our project in Argentina. And at the end, we got 3 bids to buy us out completely from 3 Chinese companies, because all the American folks that we approached, and we engaged the Bank of America, by the way, they scoured the world. The Japanese passed, the Koreans passed, the Americans, the Germans passed, and 3 bids from China later. We take it to Investment Canada. We take it to our shareholders. 98.7% of our shareholders voted in favor of the deal, and Investment Canada didn't have a problem on the basis of net benefits to Canadians and national security grounds. The project was in Argentina, after all. As soon as that deal was announced, the leader of the Queens, I believe back then, or Her Majesty's Royal Opposition, started screaming, "How are we letting this happen?" And in a knee-jerk reaction, the Prime Minister imposed this new rule about Chinese investments in Canadian critical mineral companies, regardless of where their projects were, had to divest. So it basically killed the junior mining, the exploration sector in Canada, because one of the prime investors into that space on the TSX, on Canadian junior miners, were Chinese investors. The exploration company and the resource sector in Canada is still suffering as a result of that. And I'll use one example. Before Christmas, I had lunch in London with a number of friends, former shareholders of mine and investors, fund managers, who, to a person, they all said, "We're not touching anything in Canada. because A, you're not allowing any Chinese investors to jointly help fund the development of these projects. And second, if a Canadian company decides to maximize the value to its shareholders by selling to a Chinese investor, then that's not possible. So what's the point of taking the risk without the appropriate reward? And Canadian junior mining companies, exploration companies, the companies that are developing the next resource center in the country, they cannot fund themselves. We're having a bit of a double whammy where we're excluding a lot of the risk capital that would have been available to these companies. And second, we're at the down part of a cycle that's making it virtually impossible to finance exploration in the country. So yeah, I would chalk that up to being another own goal. And I think we need to be serious. We need to be adults about it, and things need to change. As long as you can put proper parameters around what happens with these investments, you have to allow a portion of that product to make itself available to Canadian, North American, whatever other customers. But to this day, we don't have a single customer in Canada that's buying lithium and turning it into batteries. So again, what exactly were we trying to protect? China, going back to your earlier point, Stephen, unless we allow these emerging producers and emerging companies to access the largest market for critical minerals, supply chains, EV supply chains, and green technology supply chains, which is China, then we are forcing them to be excluded from one of the easier ways that A, they could finance themselves, and B, they could sell themselves. They can sell their products into a market that will allow them to generate cash flow and get to the next stage.
See, that's a great answer. And I just have one follow-up question just dawned on me while you were speaking is, what has been the reaction of some of these Canadian miners that are, incorporated in Canada, headquartered in Canada? What are they doing in response to this?
Well, again, I am having a number of conversations. A number of them are considering delisting from the Toronto Stock Exchange, listing on the NASDAQ, Sydney, perhaps even Singapore, Abu Dhabi, re-domiciling their headquarters outside of Canada. And I'm also aware of a number of folks who are looking to develop new projects. And I'd be shocked if those projects are owned in Canada by Canadian entities. So again, actions have consequences, and that was not the smartest that we could have done. And I think we're now forcing the hand of entrepreneurs to locate somewhere where they can have a bit more freedom to generate value for their investors.
So, first the business community. Now we're going to move on to the academic community. Firstly, with Professor Paul Evans, my good friend, and Paul and I, we've had many conversations about research partnerships and university cooperation. So I'm looking forward to refreshing, the content of those discussions to today's environment. And sort of looking back and setting the stage today, I went back and looked at the Indo-Pacific strategy, which was announced here in Vancouver just over 2 years ago, to considerable fanfare. I think it was intended to. It was in the context of the two Michaels and the Meng Wanzhou situation, and was intended to perhaps reset or orientation for trade and investment with Asia. And I wanted just to start off with one passage, and I'd like the audience to think about this passage, in relation to China, but how it might apply to other situations that Canada is now facing. This is the quote: "China's assertive pursuit of its economic and security interests, advancement of unilateral claims, foreign interference, and increasingly coercive treatment of other countries and economies have significant implications in the region, in Canada, and around the world." It's a very interesting statement to read in today's environment. But Paul, I wanted to set that as the context, but then I wanted to think about going forward, as Bijan has mentioned, is the purpose of today's event. Can you share with us your thoughts on the strategic options for the new government in resetting the Canada-China economic relationship, with particular attention to the meaning, scope, and intensity of Prime Minister Carney's stated desire to diversify? And there's always, sometimes two parts to the question. And I would also love to hear your views on whether it's time for an Indo-Pacific strategy version 2.0, and is it time to recognize the very significant role China plays in ASEAN?
Well, thank you, Stephen, for the opportunity to be with you today. I share Constantine's views that you ask, in some ways, complex, multidimensional questions, many of which are rhetorical in the answer that's assumed. But I think all of us share the view that this is a complex and interesting moment in world affairs, and where Canada sits in world affairs, and it's in part its relationship with China. And you use several words, Stephen, that I'll borrow from, and I'm not sure exactly what moment we're in vis-a-vis Canadian-China policy. And that's whether certainly we need a review and reassessment in light of a lot of moving pieces on the chessboard of Canadian interests and values. But the real issue is whether we're going to be moving towards refreshing the policies and attitudes of the last few years, or whether we're looking for a restart. I think that the starting point in figuring that one out is where the Indo-Pacific strategy from 2022 has left us. I would use two D words that I think indicate that are the broad framing. We didn't have an explicit China policy in the last years of the Trudeau government, but we had, through actions, through inference, the kinds of decisions, some of them economic, but on security and other issues, where we did very closely align with the United States. But we never had an explicit policy. What we did have was China by inference in that Indo-Pacific strategy. And it strikes me that it's no longer Madame Jolie's approach is completely adequate to the moment we're in. And because of two Ds. The first is the idea of the disruptor, which you just quoted from, and is an approach that suggested that an order, a rules-based international order, was facing challenges, which indeed it is, but that a principal disruptor was China. And that kind of vocabulary was a little softer than describing China as an adversary, an enemy, or even a strategic competitor. But the idea of China as the disruptor that we needed to align with positive forces to either constrain or to limit, that idea of disruptor has been blown out of the water, not because of changes in Chinese behavior and actions, but because obviously of the United States. And the principal pillar underlying the Indo-Pacific as the Asia-Pacific economy were some elements of freer trade, of transparent and visible trading rules, and then a security architecture beneath that. If we were putting on a scale of 1 to 10, what is the more disruptor country in the region, the United States or China? I think if we did a circumnavigation of the region, it's pretty clear what the answer is. And further, the problem with that disruptor word is it focused on countries. It didn't focus on technologies in an era now, 3 years later, on artificial intelligence, on a whole revisiting of where technology and national power live together. There are a lot of disruptive forces. So singling out China as a disruptor as with the response that we need to work with like-minded countries to deal with the disruptor, it just doesn't pass even a basic test of reasonable and rationality, of reason and rationality. The other D word is diversification. And that's where I think Constantine and Stephen, you're both hitting on some of the same ideas. Mr. Carney, and I think almost all Canadians, see diversification as part of the response to the challenge of Mr. Trump and America first. No question of that. But what kind of diversification? In the Indo-Pacific strategy, diversification of our trading relations, our academic exchanges, et cetera, was focused around the Indo-Pacific without China. China was not seen as a place we should be building up, creating more positive relations. It was diversification without China, and in some ways around China. Now, that may be the approach that our new government will continue to take. I don't know, I would take odds on where they're going to go. But the other kind of diversification is diversification with China, for all of the reasons Constantine stated, and a fundamental reason that you can't have diversification without having China as part of that. Now, what the actual rules and limits would be in that we need to discuss. But under this diversification too, what I would call more radical diversification, building Canadian independence in a variety of sectors, in which critical minerals, electric vehicles are just the tip of the iceberg of the number of areas where, if we really want to diversify, if we really want multilateral regional trading rules, we have to have China built in. Now, we can make that case whether a government in Ottawa is going to go for it, balancing words to describe China that Mr. Carney has used as not part of the like-minded, or his comment that we need to diversify with reliable partners. Good debate whether China is a reliable partner, but it's not automatically not. So I think the Indo-Pacific strategy is going to, whether it's thrown out or substantially modified, is on the agenda. And we may all end up with something that is going to look a lot like it, depending on how you read the signals coming out of this new cabinet.
Thanks very much. Just one follow-up question, and I alluded to it in my opening comments, and I know you've spent a lot of time in Singapore. I've spent a lot of time in Singapore. It may not fit exactly, how we in Canada see ourselves, including as a competitive democracy. But how does Singapore navigate, the relationships with China and the United States? And are there lessons to be learned from that experience?
Well, I don't think whether it's Singapore or Australia or any of the countries that have very deep economic interactions with China. I don't know, I look to them for lessons, but I do look to them for observations and approaches that we might want to take consideration of. And I think the view from Southeast Asia, and by the way, I'm living there now 4 to 5 months each year. It's more pleasant to view China from Singapore than it is necessarily from Canada. There's a complexity. Some of the things that are built into Southeast Asian approaches are realism and pragmatism, and a recognition of big forces changing, and a shift away from an American-dominated economic and security system, even as much as they'd like to maintain an American role. America first is seen as a long-term trend they have to react to. And I think 2 observations that I hear regularly from Southeast Asia about our Canadian approach to China. One is that we have increasingly become, in the latter 3 or 4 years after the 2 Michaels, the 3 M's affair, we become America's deputy sheriff, not with military or with the bullets, but in terms of lining up with American policy. And they see our Indo-Pacific strategy as Biden light or Biden informed. They don't know what we're going to do with Mr. Trump. and how long that's going to live. But it was this view that we were mirroring the United States, that we didn't have an independent perspective. And there was also an observation that was important, which was the idea that Canada was abandoning multilateral principles. That EV decision that Constantine mentioned was frequently mentioned to me as, yeah, Canada might have wished to do what it did, but why didn't you do it through WTO channels? If you guys are the advocates of multilateralism, why were you then essentially using carbon copy illegal actions by the United States So Canada is not seen as a hero, but it is seen as with some compassion, because Southeast Asians recognize we are not like them in the sense we have as much latitude for choice. The American dominance of our economy, our security relationship with the United States makes us special and different, but they do question why we aren't pushing our independent, pragmatic interests more strongly.
Thank you very much, Paul. And for those who have not heard the current Prime Minister's speech relating to the tariff situation, I really commend the audience to listen to that. It is a terrific piece of viewpoint on the trading relationship and the importance of multilateral rules-based approach. Now, Paul, I just want to turn to the next and final topic for you, and it's the topic of research partnerships. I know that you have written extensively and spoken on the topic very extensively and passionately. And I think we all know that in the past, Canadian universities have partnered with Chinese universities and businesses on a wide range of topics, including humanities, science, technology, and engineering. Can you speak, Paul, on the situation going forward? And is there a role for collaborative research and partnerships? And how far, and I apologize, I'm going to use this word, which I really don't like-minded. How far do we align with US and like-minded partners in defining sensitive sectors and suspicious partners or suspect partners? And how far can we go to develop a made in Canada approach based on distinctive Canadian experience and interests in the field of research partnerships?
Well, it's one of those rhetorical questions. I like the way your last sentence ran, is the kind of case that I've been making. And Gwen will speak in a minute more broadly on universities. My general view is that in this, whether it's a refresh or a restart, the tone of the relationship matters. The words we use and people-to-people connections are essential. Now, to call universities part of people-to-people is pretty important. And that there has clearly descended a considerable chill among all of our major institutions in the level and in the volume of our activities with Chinese partners. Some of that relates to recruitment of students, but it also relates to our research capabilities. And I think that one of the a leading part of this reassessment needs to be, what do we do to consolidate and strengthen our existing connections? That chill is significant, and it's particularly significant now around research collaborations and partnerships in the STEM areas. But that's getting a much bigger, what we're afraid of is being defined more and more broadly. And it's having an effect on the volume of our activities, but also particularly on our Chinese professors who are here, and the recruitment of students and others, of graduate students into our programs. So that if what we can do going forward is start to speak about the rules that are coming down around sensitive sectors and around reliable partners in China. Not to say that there aren't sensitive sectors, there are, and that there are unreliable partners in China, but to be very fine-tooth comb on who they are, and not to simply replicate what the Americans have been putting down as the guidelines in those areas, their definitions. There are Canadian national interests that are different. And finally, and I hope Gwen can speak to this, universities have to get out in front again in the public discussion on the values, the complexities, but also the values that underscore what we want to do with Chinese universities. It's part of our mission of dealing with global issues, global human problems, the universality of scientific research. But what our universities have to be able to emphasize is that for research excellence, for the solution of problems, China is no longer a place we give research aid to. China is a place where leading world-class research is occurring. Put limits on real national security concerns, but don't rule out China as a matter of a category. And let's open up again why we want to work with China through our universities. And my colleague from the University of Toronto can expand on this more directly from a Central Canadian viewpoint.
Thanks very much, Paul. And indeed, I am now turning to Gwen Burrows, and you've alluded to the longstanding, multifaceted relationship Canadian universities have had with Chinese universities, including in research, student exchange, recruitment. And I'm sure Gwen will acknowledge that in her comments that Canadian universities are very rich in their diversity in drawing students globally to Canada for the benefit of Canada and our economy. Gwen, I want to start with the more sensitive area around the sensitive technology research and affiliations of concern policy that was adopted a couple of years ago now by the federal government, which lays out the areas that Paul mentioned, sensitive technologies, dual-use technologies, where collaborations with Chinese institutions will not be funded anymore. But again, with the tone of today's session being around the art of the possible, moving forward, what areas are there that remain open for collaboration with top Chinese universities by institutions like the University of Toronto?
Great. Thank you, Stephen. And thanks, Paul, for the setup and serve there in terms of some key themes that I wanted to bring out. So just for this audience, I'm not sure everyone is aware of the so-called STRAC, or the Sensitive Technology Research and Affiliations of Concern policy. So what that sets out is not only a set of areas, but also a set of institutions in China with whom research collaboration is not encouraged due to security reasons. And to note that this was actually clarity that the university sector, certainly the research university sector, had sought from the federal government, just like businesses. Academics don't like uncertainty vis-a-vis the rules. So churn in those sorts of things is actually as much a chill as setting out a clear policy framework. So it was certainly responsive to a set of government concerns, but also universities requesting clarity on what those areas may or may not be. That said, I think it's really important to continue to develop collaborations for all the reasons that Paul said, not only with universities in China, but also we've had some pretty robust corporate partners in the past, right? So collaboration is not just academic to academic, but also our innovation partnerships. And often Chinese companies can fund innovation in Canada where the IP is shared or kept in Canada. So there's a number of different ways that we've partnered over the years with our colleagues in China. And there remains a number of different areas that really benefit from a global perspective and from the excellence in science that is very much present in China. So I think the way in which the dialogue is sometimes framed is that we're giving away our expertise, we're giving away our IP, but we're not benefiting from it. But indeed, the level of science in China is extremely sophisticated in a number of areas. And so we benefit mutually from collaboration, most of which, of course, ends up in the public sphere through peer-reviewed articles. So areas would include things like climate change and sustainability, right? Key challenges, key innovations needed going forward, sustainable development goals, urban development, and the perspective of China and their experience on urban development and what we might learn from studying that and working with colleagues there. Health, public health, all sorts of medical science collaborations that are ongoing and should be ongoing, from basic stem cell research to genetics, so understanding there, business economics. And I would also note that I think we cut off collaboration with China at our peril. So at University of Toronto, we've really emphasized with a number of colleagues across the country the importance of encouraging a new generation of scholars in the social sciences in particular to have a depth of knowledge about politics, about economics, about culture, who can speak Mandarin, who can speak Cantonese, who are well positioned to contribute to the ties between our two countries, but also strategically, it doesn't do Canada any favors to not have those experts within Canada. So those are some sort of key areas where we continue to have discussions with colleagues in both Hong Kong and China around collaboration, and where we see a real mutual benefit in those collaborations. And you'll of course have a follow-up question because
of course I'll have a follow-up question.
Bring it on.
So, thanks for highlighting that point about mutual benefit, which I think it's super important. The other thing I just wanted to try to draw out and to bring us forward on the current situation is, and I know that COVID had an impact on this, but I'm very curious to understand, where are we on the flow of students from China into Canada, and even vice versa, right? The flow of Canadian students into China, because one of the things that I think is a safe harbor, if I could use that word again, on evolving positive relationship is the people contact going forward. So I'm just curious on, where do we sit with that in today's environment?
So we continue across the country, certainly in universities, to attract Chinese students to our universities. It benefits us from a diversity of perspectives, which of course, and we always seek to recruit top talent from around the world. There's been a real effort in most universities to diversify where we're recruiting students from. That's wise. I'm talking to a business audience. We always want to diversify your portfolio, but we've found that those students have been critical contributors to our community and set up those critical links. A lot of those individuals go back to China, right? And those are future business contacts, they're future collaborators on research, and they're also people who've experienced living in Canada and are future advocates diplomatically for our country. So really critical to continue to attract those students for a number of different reasons. And certainly at the University of Toronto, we continue to have a very large number of Chinese undergraduate and graduate students. So our population of students is almost 100,000, of which almost 20,000 would come from Hong Kong and China. So a significant number very valued. At a graduate level, and Paul sort of referenced this or gestured towards this as well, just a reminder that universities, research universities, attract top talent from around the world and basically pay those students to attend the university because they bring their talents to our research endeavors. So those are future innovators, and they're contributing to what makes some of the top universities in Canada top universities in the world as well. So it's really important that we continue to attract those, and just mindful of time and wanting to leave Martin some time as well, but just a kind of comment on the people-to-people ties. when Ambassador Wang came to Canada, in his new posting last year, he noted in a interview that the only thing he knew about Canada was that there was this guy Norman Bethune, who is of course proudly associated with the University of Toronto, so we noticed that right away. But deep people-to-people ties can really shape the opportunities between countries, and I think it's worth taking that long view, that historical view on what that can look like. So
thanks very much, Gwen, for that, and thanks for raising Ambassador Wong. He did participate in a roundtable session here in our offices earlier this year, and I don't think I'm transgressing on the rules of that session to say that we discussed the importance of people-to-people ties and the significant role the business community and the academic community can play during this period where the connectivity at the government level perhaps isn't there. So there's certainly other avenues for those groups to participate, and of course the CCBC. And with us now is Martin Kassan.
We sort of think about this as durable diplomacy, right? So there's all sorts of things that business communities, certainly academic communities, can sustain even as tensions at a national or at a government to government level are high.
No, I love that term, durable diplomacy, because there's a number of groups, individuals that during the period of the last 3 years have provided that durability, including the CCBC. So Martin, last but not least, very pleased for Martin to join us, especially given his role as former Minister of Justice and Attorney General of Canada under our former government. Martin now plays a role at DS Lawyers in Canada. So Martin are both our colleagues trying to navigate the day-to-day relationship between Canada and China. But it's challenging. And I think one of the points that continually gets raised is with the new U.S. administration in place and Canada's desire to diversify relationships, how far can it go without exacerbating more problems or creating more problems with the U.S. administration? Is there a path to move ahead? So this is going to be, I think, a very interesting part of our discussion today, and an important one. So Martin, just over to you. Given the considerations that I mentioned about navigating between the desire to diversify and to maintain a positive relationship with Canada's most important trading partner, is there a door open to really substantively restart the relationship with China?
Well, thank you very much for the question, Stephen. First, as Vice Chairman of the CCBC, I'd like to thank you very much for being moderator today and for the sponsorship as well. I'd like to thank also the panelists that have decided to join, because it's a tremendous amount of time. It takes it's a lot of preparation as well. So we appreciated the CCBC, you taking the time. Thanks the audience as well. And thanks my friend Bijan for organizing all that. It's tremendous success. I believe that today we have more than 180 members of the audience. So it shows the interest from Canadian people in terms of the relationship between Canada and China. And to go straight to the question, is there a door open? I believe that over the past 10 years, I've never seen before a door so widely open to re-engage with China. Thanks to many circumstances. First of all, China is very open to re-engage again with Canada, and that was very well demonstrated by the ambassador last weekend with his statement. when he said really that they expect the new government to get involved into a relationship, call it whatever, to reset the relationship. But they're very open. And what was very interesting in what he said, we do recognize that there's different in values between the two countries, and maybe we can even mention different culture. But he said it's totally normal. So the message it sends is that Chinese understand that we're coming from different point of views, and they accept as well that has to be discussed when we get into a cooperation, a partnership, but has to be done with respect to each other. And it goes straight to what the ambassador said one day: to re-engage, we have to rebuild trust. And I think that the trust factor, if we want to re-engage again with China, will be key. And a trust demonstration has to be done on both sides. So China is there. On our side, it's a unique timing in the sense that what's happening now with our neighbor, the tariff, forces us to diversify. Of course, we're going to have to get reorganized within Canada. The barriers among the provinces, invest in technology, and as well as Prime Minister Carney said, we need to diversify our market, because don't believe that the relationship with our neighbor will ever be the same, bearing in mind the fact that they will remain our biggest trade partner. Of course, when you look at diversifying our market, some are going to say, you know what, we've signed 15 free trade agreements, and the 15 free trade agreements touches upon, I guess it's more than 50 countries. So there's a lot of countries that we can go to and we can knock on in order to start businesses and cooperation. But I think that China is a key partner that we should re-engage in, and for many reasons. The reason, for example, I was reading not long ago, Thomas Friedman in the New York Times, and I guess all the people are going to be smiling, because those that are interested by the Canada-China relationship probably wrote that paper, when he said some times ago, when you wanted to see the future, you were going to the United States. Today, if you want to see the future, you're going to China. So they are investing in technology. They're doing a lot of research and development, as was mentioned by the previous panelists. And I guess that Canada has to get involved into that. It's not, China now is not the country that it used to be. They have a manpower that is very well trained. They have state-of-the-art technology. Look at the EV car that Constantine was speaking at the beginning. And in terms of EV car, they're probably the number one in the world now. Why we wouldn't get involved into that fantastic adventure and share as well with China and get into those technologies and research? We have to keep in mind that whether we like it or not, China is still our second biggest trading partner. Of course, the USA are 20 times bigger, but our trade deficit with China is pretty big, notwithstanding that the fact that the amount is not the same compared to the States. So there's still a lot of work to do. Other reason also why we have to engage and keep the door open on the opportunity that we have as a country is what I call the geopolitics. I mean, China and Canada are players in some global organization, United Nations, APEC that was mentioned earlier, but as well WTO. And at WTO, we should be an important player for the Chinese, because I remember when they decided to join WTO, Canada, and I was around the table, was one of the very strong and among the first player to support them and to do everything they could do in order to make sure that China would have access to the WTO and to that great organization. Another reason also, when I speak about the geopolitics, and we don't mention that very often, but back some years ago, back in 2014, I believe, President Xi launched what they call the New Silk Road. Today, we don't speak about that very much in Canada, and I guess it's the same in the States. But so far, when you look at the people that got involved into projects with China, or that signed an LOI with China regarding that new infrastructure project of China, we're talking about more than 145 countries. So it's a lot of relationship. It's about, of course, economic development, it's about infrastructure, that project. It's also about politics and geopolitics. And that's another reason why Canada should keep the door open and engage again with China. So, and another reason, I believe we have a unique timing. We have a brand new government, a brand new prime minister, and I believe that our new prime minister is pretty much open-minded vis-a-vis the relationship with Canada, between Canada and China.
I had a question coming in on the chat, which I think your response is a beautiful segue into this question, but it's an interesting way to pose the Canada-China-US relationship. But the question is, how does an open economic relationship with China provide Canada with leverage to mitigate current tensions with the United States?
That's a very interesting question. That's a key issue, as a matter of fact. I mean, I was talking about Prime Minister Carney. Prime Minister Carney, to me, is the right person at the right moment. And I'm sure that there's a way to engage with China in a very pragmatic way and strike the right balance in between our interest in the USA and as well our interest in China. Let's start with Prime Minister Carney. I said he's the right person at the right time. Look at the experience that he has. First of all, he has a very good experience about what we call global diplomacy. As former governor of the Bank of Canada, and as well being in England for the Bank of England, he traveled the world. He's met the leader. He knows how it works. He's got a tremendous network that Canada should be very proud of. Second, he knows China. He's been there. He's been there many times. He's done business with China. He knows the leader of China as well. So I think that if we want to reset the relationship, start with a new footing, I believe that we have the Prime Minister and now as well the right Foreign Affairs Minister. Anita Anand will be very focused, has a lot of experience as well. So I believe that this new government will be able, as I said, to strike the right balance. Of course, we have a unique situation with the USA. We're the next door neighbor. We represent the main export market for 40 states. They represent 75% of our exports. So that's a relationship that's there that we have to pay attention. But I don't think that prevents Canada from engaging with China. I mean, other countries in the world, they have very strong relationship as well with the USA, and they engage with China. And the USA themselves are doing business with China. Look, I mean, they put a pause on the tariff for obvious reasons, because the world now is so interconnected that there's no way you're going to be able to live alone in your corner with a set of tariff that you're using as a wall. That doesn't exist anymore. Now, to re-engage with China, I guess there's some key challenges for Prime Minister Carney and the new team. As I said earlier, strike the right balance with the states. Second, we're working in a minority government. So it means that the work will be a bit more demanding with the caucus and as well the other parties in the House. And again, the momentum that we have because of the tariff, I guess is giving us a real opportunity to work on something that will be positive for Canada and China. But there, I believe we're going to have to show leadership from our politicians, but as well leadership from our business community. And another challenge that we have is what I call the court of public opinion. No need to mention that some times ago, people were not very there as a result of what you mentioned, Stephen, the episode of the two Michaels. But now with what's happening, it looks that people do understand that Canada has to diversify, do understand that China is not the same country. It's a country, as I said, with very strong, well-educated manpower, with high technology as well. They do understand that that China is ready to sit and have an open discussion and a broad discussion that include as well of our values, as long as we respect each other. And what I see now, it's a public opinion in Canada, not only with the business community, but the people, the Canadian people, that are moving more toward China. It's evolving when you look at the numbers. I'm not saying that we're getting there, but it's moving. And with the help and with some leadership, I guess that we really can keep the door open and make that relationship very fruitful again for the two countries, and go back to what I call the golden years of the Chrétien government, when I was there with me, when other people like John Manley was there, like Sergio Marchi, and of course with a leader like Jean Chrétien. And I believe when I look at Prime Minister Carney, I really hope and I believe we're going to be able to go back to those golden era.
Thanks very much for that optimistic tone, Martin. And I think that we're on a CCBC event here, and I think we have a bunch of members online today, and others that perhaps aren't members yet, but maybe should consider being so. How does the CCBC and its membership help navigate moving forward in this new chapter?
I mean, Stephen, I mean, obviously we're not the government, but we can certainly support the government. First of all, we are the oldest bilateral organization between Canada and China. We go back to 1978 after the open door policy mentioned by Deng Xiaoping at the time, and you know, the relationship that we have with China, it can certainly help. Second, as I mentioned, CCBC is a bilateral organization, so it means that we have Chinese companies involved. So it's a very nice forum to have a discussion about a bilateral relationship and a reset between the two countries. Second, I think that I was speaking earlier about the public opinion, and of course it takes leadership, but as well it takes knowledge and it takes explanation. I think there's a way for CCBC to get involved a bit more into what I call research on different topics, and then communicate those research and the result to the Canadian people and the Canadian business community as well, to better explain what Canada is today, what it means for our country, what it means, for example, for the agri-food, for the natural resources, for minerals, for our economy as a whole. So that and another role that CCBC could certainly play in a minority context. I mentioned that there's a lot of legwork to be that we're gonna have to do with the various caucuses and members of parliament as well, and ministers. And I think that the CCBC there could play a role in reaching out to all the parties in the House and have an open discussion about the wider relationship and why it's good for both, not only both our business communities, but as well our people on both sides, in Canada and China. Another role that we could play is to organize commercial mission. We already do that, but just put maybe more emphasis on that, not only have a big show at the AGM in the fall that what we used to do, which is very, very profitable and it's a benefit to the two countries. But I guess we should do a bit more on that side. And then think now that the AGM is coming in the fall, maybe invite the new foreign ministers, and why not our Canadian Prime Minister? There's going to be a unique occasion to send a message to China to the effect that we're ready to partner again with an open mind, mutual respect, and to establish and build the trust that we used to know. I mean, we forget, but Canada and China since the 70s have been friends. And I'm sure that with Prime Minister Carney, will remain friend again.
Thanks. Thank you very much, Martin, for that comment. Given the very interesting topics we discussed today, we do have quite a number of questions from our audience. I have taken one of them already and passed it on to Martin, but we have others. So we'll try to deal with those in the the 5 remaining minutes that we have for today's session. So the first question is directed at Gwen and Paul, and I'll read the question out. During the call, the speakers referenced the need for universities to be more proactive in relaying the benefits of research partnerships. Questions for Paul and Gwen, sorry. To the extent they are able to share, what is the general view about this within the university community across the country?
It's a good question because it suggests that we are not of one voice. And of course, that's true. There are some in our universities who feel that China is an adversary, that we are engaged in what is the equivalent of a Cold War with China, and that its human rights record, et cetera, should put limits on what we do with China that we wouldn't put in place with the like-minded or others. And I think that question underscores the importance of our university leaders helping lead a discussion on the China file. We used to do this. Stephen Toop and others led important work in our universities as we were expanding our contacts with China. Individual professors can take up some of that. But I think that U15 and other groups should be sending out some signals so that we can solidify, recognize the real concerns, the real worries, where we should put those restrictions, but that our emphasis is on how we can keep that door as open as possible and look for new opportunities.
I can, I'll leave it at that. I don't disagree with that. I think some university presidents have been more open than others around that, but it's been a few years of being very careful around some of the research security issues that have been raised. So I think there's been more tentativeness in the last few years around articulating that, and perhaps we're moving towards a different moment.
Back to Constantine, who started off our panel today. The question revolves around diversification into the Asia-Pacific region. And the question is, how feasible is it? Do we need, and this is my embellishment, do we need government to assist with that? Can business do that? What are the next first steps to diversification of trade and investment into the Asia-Pacific region?
Another great question. Government has to lead the way, given the fact that some of the challenges that business is facing today when it comes to trade between Canada and China has been sort of influenced by government actions. So like Martin, I was around during the Team Canada missions when Prime Minister Chrétien was there and led the missions with the provincial premiers. And what I can tell you, because I was extremely busy at the time building the company that I eventually retired from, as a small company, nothing opens doors in Asia as government engagement. The fact that we tagged along with the government in meetings in Korea, in Japan, in China, in Thailand, and the Philippines really made it incredibly or infinitely easier for us to access the right people, both in government and in business. So a lot of the criticisms about Team Canada missions, in my view, were political. I think it makes all the sense in the world, especially for smaller companies. And to avoid the risk of being accused of being partisan, I would remind everybody that in 2012, when Prime Minister Harper was in Guangzhou as part of a not Team Canada mission, but a trade mission, he made it very clear. And to quote what he said is, we want to sell our oil to countries that want to buy our oil. End of story. He didn't say we want to sell our oil to friends of ours. allies of ours or countries who see the world the same way. No, we just want to do business with everybody. And I think diversification, if we are going to be serious about it, involves everything that this country makes, from oil to minerals to technologies. We should want to deal with everybody, especially the second largest economy in the world. So government needs to lead the way, because those relationships need to be reestablished. And right now there was damage done by previous actions. And to reminisce back to the Chrétien days, you keep the criticism of your interlocutors behind closed doors, and you carry on with diplomacy in the public space, not the other way around. So I think, yeah, the state of relations between Canada and China needs to be repaired at the government level first. And I believe that will open doors for companies to come in through, especially small and medium-sized enterprises that, at the end of the day, create an awful lot of the jobs in Canada.
Thank you for mentioning those Team Canada events. Prime Minister Chrétien will probably be offended by referring to Paul Martin's trips to China as Team Canada, but nevertheless, that was my introduction to China, and it forever changed my professional life. So thanks for mentioning that. And with that, we're just at 1:16. I think we're pretty much on time, within a minute. So I want to thank again the CCBC, all of our panelists, Bijan for organizing this with his team. I think this has been a terrific exchange of ideas, and hopefully it will spawn further engagement and movement positively forward in the relationship. So thanks again to everyone.